progress.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will be starting in about 30 seconds. If I could please ask that everyone find a seat and make yourselves comfortable. Welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure to see everyone here. We're about to start in about 15 seconds. Although in about a minute ago I said we're going to start in 30 seconds. So could I please ask that everyone find a comfortable chair? They're all comfortable. And please join us as we start this groundbreaking program. This is the second time that KOH has been open to the public since the pandemic. So it's a seminal event, something that I'm really, really excited about. And it's the second part of our End of Life series, everything you wanted to know about the end of life, but were afraid to ask. And I'd like to make some thank yous to start out with. And then also, can I actually borrow that over there? Thanks. And then I'll tell you what's on tap for today. First, I'd like to thank the KOH for making this program possible and the wonderful facilities, the Kashenberg Ostro Hayward Library and Cultural Center, with the founders Hai Kashenberg, Bill and Shola Ostro, Michael and Millie Hayward. I'd like to thank some volunteers and some givers from the KOH, Dwight Freund, Joanne Freund, Michael Singer, Talia Berger, and thank you to Hai Kashenberg, who made the refreshments, which are so beautiful, so possible. I'd also like to thank the KOH Library for the use of the Hayward camera. I'd like to give a special thank you to Stephen Polansky and Talia Berger. The three of us planned the program from imagination to today, and we've worked very hard to make this moment possible. I'd like to thank also Cody Media, who's running the media, our AV tech person today, and the staff at MLC. The staff at MLC under the direction of our executive director, Karen Rubin. And with that, I want to tell you what we have planned for today. First, we have Rabbi Moses, Lionel Moses, who's in from Montreal. And Rabbi Moses was a rabbi 25 years ago, and he's back as our interim rabbi. Following Rabbi Moses, who will be talking about an element of just before the end of life and the Talmud, we will be having Rabbi Ben Herman, who's our incoming, our rabbi-elect. And he will be talking about organ donation and vidui and some other elements of the end of life. Following that, we have two wonderful, wonderful mortuaries or funeral homes that we work with as Jewish mortuaries. We have Lynn Brothers, and they were here last week. And we have Rebecca Mann and Sarah, what's your last name? Miwa, who are here as representatives from Lombard. And it's a pleasure to have you here. And thank you so much for coming. Following Lombard Mortuary, we will have Mark Blum, who I just met today. It's a pleasure getting to know you. And Mark will be talking about hospice care. Now, we will be having a question and answer session after that. So with one exception, please refrain from asking questions, or you could ask questions on Zoom and we will answer them later. Rabbi Moses will be fielding questions directly following his presentation because he's going to run off and teach another class. Like so many clergy, we're doing 2-3 things at once. And so we're really, really thankful for your time here in the 2 years, getting to know you and holding up the house of worship, so to say, while we were in the middle of the pandemic. So thank you so much. So with that, I'd like to introduce Rabbi Moses, who will be coming up here, or maybe you'll be speaking over there. Where would you prefer? And thank you so much for everyone being here on Zoom, across the nation, some people visiting from outside Sacramento, and thank you everyone who came in person.
Good evening. First of all, it's always great, it is great to have been back here at Mosaic Law for just shy of 2 years, and to actually be in this library, and there are actually other people here. For the last 2 years, thanks to a key that was given to me surreptitiously by Talia and Joanne, I'm the only person who has used the library regularly. So I wrote some notes, put them in a file. I made certain the file was thick because that way you would think I did a lot of homework. But I just want you to see that everything in the file is irrelevant. This is everything that I'm going to talk about. We've reduced it to one sheet, right? So we want to talk about end of life and that period of time that I suspect everyone here has experienced with family members and friends, sometimes at home, and sometimes, some more often than not, in the hospital. Someone that we love very dearly has been sick for a period of time, or perhaps has suffered ultimately a fatal stroke or heart attack, and is in bed and is near death. And there is a sense, real sense, that the person is suffering, and you want to do everything you can to remove the suffering. And yet, we know that doing everything you can would ultimately mean killing someone, and that in this country is still a crime, except under very limited circumstances. So what does Judaism, first of all, have to say about pain and suffering at the time of death? And what do you do about it when you experience it? So there's a story about a rabbi named Rabbi Yochanan, who was a study partner with his brother-in-law. And his brother-in-law had just died. Rabbi Yochanan was suffering terribly, emotionally suffering, physically suffering. And the rabbis, his students, Rabbi Yochanan's students, prayed. Because what did rabbis do? What do priests do? What do ministers do? The best thing we can do is pray. And the rabbis prayed that Rabbi Yochanan, would recover, that he would come back to himself. The more they prayed, the worse he got. His spirits were down, his physicality was down, willingness to eat, to drink, everything was down. The rabbis realized that the suffering was unbearable for him. So what the rabbis did might surprise you. Do you know what? Can anyone guess what the rabbis did? Say again. Say it louder. They stopped praying. That's what you need to do. So while in our tradition, when someone is sick, and we have a long list here of people at varying stages of illness for whom we pray for their recovery, there's a point at which the prayers that we need to say to ask for recovery are futile. They're a waste of time, because we know that recovery is very unlikely to happen, and therefore we want someone to stop suffering, to stop feeling the pain. And another story. Story of Rabbi Judah Nasi. Rabbi Judah Nasi lived at the last third of the 2nd century. And he personally was dying, and of course his students were praying. But it was his maid, the woman who worked in his house, who helped keep the place clean and prepare meals and so forth. She too began to pray, and realized that the prayers were unhelpful. And she said to Rabbi Yahudah, who was still cognizant and could hear, she said to him, "You know, Rabbi, you are being requested above in heaven, and people down here on earth still want you to live." And so she said she too stopped praying, but the rabbis didn't. The rabbis, his students, continued to pray. So how could she distract the rabbis? There was a very large jug that was used for carrying water, and it was a clay jug. And she took the jug, lifted it up, and smashed it against the ground. And the rabbis were startled by the smashing of the jug. They stopped praying for an instant. And in that instant, the soul of Rabbi Yehudah Nasi passed away. You see, a woman who was housekeeper, a maid, someone who worked in a house, probably not well educated, understood better than a room full of rabbis what needs to be done when someone is suffering. You stop doing what instinct tells you to do, but what your brain needs you to do, to let someone go. Person who is close to death is referred to in Jewish tradition as a goses. Goses is defined as someone whom the rabbis said was within 3 days of death. Of course, today with medical technology, one of the things as a rabbi I tell folks is we can't predict when someone's going to die. No matter how ill they are, we don't know if it's today, tomorrow, or in a week. When the doctors in the hospital say your mother, your father is close to death, typically they don't say when, because no one knows when. And if they do say when, it's not always right, not always correct. It doesn't always, it's not always true. With the goses, the earliest source that we have on what to do with a goses and what you're not allowed to do and what you're permitted to do comes from a text that's from the 5th or 6th century called Tractates Machot. It's actually not in the Talmud. It's one of the extra Talmudic tractates. And it says, if I can read my own writing, Hagoses harehu kechai l'chol davar. The person who is a goses, it is as if he or she is living in all respects. You don't treat them as if they're dead. En koshrin et lechav. You don't tie up their jaw. You know, they used to tie the jaw so you couldn't breathe out of your mouth. That would hasten death, right? You were only breathing out of your nose, presumably. They didn't. You were not permitted to tie the jaw, even of a goses. Ve'em pokekin et nekevav. And you don't seal, right? You don't block the openings into his body, the mouth, the nose, etc., so that he or she can't breathe. That is, you don't assist in helping them die, but you don't assist in helping them die directly. That's murder. Ein mezizin oto, ve'ein medidchin oto. You don't move the person. Because when you move someone, as we know, who is very, close to death, that too can hasten death and cause death, in fact, by the doctor or the nurse or the medical care person doing something. And washing the body is something that we do. Traditionally, we wash the body of newborn babies. Every nurse knows that I have two obstetricians here. They know that one of the first things that's done when the baby comes out of the birth canal is a nurse takes the baby and washes the baby so the baby is beautiful and clean. And the last thing we do with a human being after he or she has died is we wash the body. You don't wash the body while they're still alive, because if they are sensitive, and we know that people have sensitivities until the moment of death, washing the body tells someone you want them dead and you don't. Hanogea bo umizizin umizizo harehu shofech tamim. If you do move the body, or you do wash the body, it is as if you are a murderer. So we really leave the body to die on its own. We don't actively do something to hasten death. I'll get to that in a moment. Rabbi Meir haya moshlo lener shehu metaftef. Rabbi Meir compared a person who is about to die to a candle that is flickering. You watch the candle, as the candle burns down, the very end, it begins to flicker. And the soul, the life of a person at the very end is like a candle that's flickering. And the moment you touch that candle, the moment you touch the candlestick, it is very possible that the light goes out. So here we are. We don't, on the one hand, we don't prevent death by praying incessantly. We let someone die. We don't put obstacles in their path to prevent them from dying. So we know from the Talmud tells us that if there are things that prevent someone from dying, we can stop them. So the Talmud gives examples from antiquity. If the person is lying in a room and someone is chopping wood outside the room and it goes bang, 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 your heart jumps every time you hear that bang. And so you tell the wood chopper, stop chopping, right? Because that allows the heart to rest, not to be stimulated again. And they used to put salt under the tongue of a person to keep them alive. And if that crystal of salt was what was keeping the person alive, you can remove the crystal of salt from under the person's tongue to give them an opportunity to die. We don't prevent death, but we don't do anything that definitely aids someone in dying. So that's where we sit. That's where we sit in the situation of where someone is at the very end of life from classical rabbinic sources. Of course, medical science has moved a great deal since the 5th or 6th century, thank God. And we know that we've experienced situations where we know that someone is dying and in a lot of pain. So what's the typical, I have hospice people here, what is the typical way that physicians reduce the pain of people in extreme pain? Cancer patients are the classic case, but they're not the exclusive case. What's the medication that's typically given? Morphine. What is the secondary effect of morphine? It reduces, heart rate. Reduces heart rate, right? So, you titrate the morphine at a low level initially so that it reduces the pain of the patient. But ultimately, the morphine needs to be increased. You titrate more, right? And ultimately, the balance between how much morphine you give to reduce the pain very often becomes that tipping point between reducing the pain and reducing the heartbeat until the heart stops. There's a variety of opinions, as rabbis, two rabbis, at least three opinions in the room. That's, but I would say a predominant, but not the only opinion is that a morphine drip with a patient who is what we call a gosses, right? Person who is in extreme pain, and not necessarily 3 days, whatever that means, putative 3 days, but someone who is in extreme pain. To give such a person a morphine, put them on a morphine drip, is perfectly permissible. And perfectly permissible to increase the morphine so that it eliminates as best as possible the pain, even if you know that the ultimate result is that the heart rate will decrease and the patient will die. The same really goes as well for people who are on heart-lung machines. This is a little bit more complicated. A heart-lung machine basically keeps someone alive mechanically. The person is, the person without that machine could not, technically could not survive. Very often these are people who are involved in serious accidents, car accidents and such, brought into the trauma center, all but dead. Heart, the ER docs and nurses get the heart stimulated again. But the person cannot stay alive unless they're put on a heart-lung machine. Lungs have collapsed, the heart is not beating on its own, and the doctors come to the family and say, I have to tell you something, so-and-so is not going to live if we take him or her off the heart-lung machine. And I get calls every so often, Rabbi, what do I do now? I don't want to kill my mom, or I don't want to kill my dad or my son or whoever, right? So we have now a tug of war. The tug of war is not just between the life and death of the person on the machine, but whether the organs of the person on that machine can give life to another person who is not on a heart-lung machine. So organ transplant, not my topic, I don't think, Cather, but I'll just touch on it. Organ transplant, under those circumstances, would be permissible. I remember there's a magazine that has been popular for years in the Jewish community called Moment. The back page of that magazine used to have a whole page of rabbis who have signed up as organ donors. So you would think, oh, it's liberal rabbis, it's the do-gooder rabbis. The number of Orthodox rabbis, Rabbi Tendler, who taught at Yeshiva University, among others like him, were prominently listed on that page. So turning off a heart-lung machine is permissible under the following circumstance. if we think that the person their heart can beat on its own, and that they can breathe on their own for at least half hour to 45 minutes without being attached to the machine, we can take the person off. And in most cases, that is likely because you need to harvest the organs from a living person. Am I correct, doctor? Not? They can be dead. They can be dead. Okay. Wrong again, as usual. So I'll take questions at this point. Mike. Yes. The answer is yes. The answer is yes. There is rabbinical advice, and the answer to that question is yes. You can have advanced directives of do not resuscitate, the NRs.
Could you sit over there so I can check the Zoom questions?
Sure.
Okay.
Let me come out this way
Yeah,
so
sure.
I don't knock over the screen.
Are there any other
This side.
questions from the audience? Okay. Hang on here.
I don't want to knock over the screen. I got a mic.
Hold on.
Hello.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. As you know well, every single family and every single person has different relationships with the people that they know. And therefore, there are so many complications between what happened during a lifetime. And it seems to be that the human situation is that they either love or don't love or whatever it may be. And basically, at the end of the day, there are certain families that walk away, other families stay together because there seems to be a strong component in there, whether it's a father, whether it's an uncle or somebody to say, wait a
What's the
second.
question? What's the question?
The question is that there's so many different ways to look at this, and I appreciate what you're saying. I really appreciate what you're saying. But something that is done throughout life for this particular individual, man or woman, that the family takes a different path than other families that do say, let's see if we can keep this guy alive.
So you're talking about the situation you're talking about is not uncommon, where a family will have, a parent will have 2 or 3 children, and they don't agree on the end of life. These are situations where these are situations that are very difficult. They're difficult for the medical staff. They're difficult if clergy are called in, and sometimes they're unresolvable. Doctors will say it's time to remove, remove mom from whatever is keeping her alive, and one child says, "No, you've got to do everything to save her," and another child will say, "The doctor is correct, and you need to follow the doctor." I can't tell anyone what to do, but I would say that typically, not universally, because there's no universally, but typically, doctor knows best. Doctor ultimately knows when it is futile to expend more medical resources on a person. It's not always the case, but it is often the case, certainly at end of life. There are times that are not end of life cases, and 2 doctors will disagree. Don't waste your energy. But at end of life, I would say 95% of the time, doctors are correct, and I would side with the doctor.
Thank you.
Linda.
Please
An
repeat
advanced
your question.
directive so that you delineate exactly when you want to be given further life, and when you don't, and your children really have no. I mean, I guess anybody can override it, but they really don't have the opportunity to override it.
So it is advisable to everyone, for everyone to have a do not resuscitate DNR order and advance directives under which circumstances. But as you know, Linda, even those advanced directives sometimes are fuzzy. And as you correctly said, that doesn't mean that one child will go to court and try to override what they think the other child has forced mom and dad to do. And that's when you get into deep, and that's, above both the doctor's pay grade and the rabbi's pay grade. And unfortunately, it falls to a judge, and he or she needs to make a very difficult decision in some cases.
I know that Mark will be speaking a little bit about this as well. I have one last question, which is on the chat, and then I'd like to facilitate Rabbi Moses running off to teach his third class of the evening. So he's well desired as a teacher, as an amazing educator. So this might also be a class for Mark for later, but Rabbi, Lydia Ingram asks, what is the feeling about using the end-of-life medical aid in dying law that went into effect in California in June 2016?
So that, from my opinion, I mean, there again, rabbis will disagree on this. My opinion would follow exactly the case the description I described from Tractate Smachot, namely that you don't do anything that will hasten the death of someone who still has life. You make them as comfortable as possible, and when that comfort requires a morphine drip, that's fine. But I think it's very important to distinguish, at least from my point of view, between assisting someone in dying, and I know that there are some very, very terrible, terrible diseases that don't fit into the simple structures that I described before. Someone with ALS or comparable diseases, this is a punishment on earth that is, I can't say worse than death because I haven't come back from there yet, but certainly a horrendous way to spend any amount of time. And so I understand how someone with ALS or that type of neurological issue would say, put me at rest, put me to sleep. I don't want to live a moment longer. I would say as a rabbi, I could not support that decision, unfortunately. But I would say that because we have patient autonomy, right? We live with, patients have full autonomy. And so a patient, and now this is true in Canada too, by the way, but here in California, patient can now say, I'm done. I've lived, I've done what I can do. My life is no longer bearable for me, and it is unbearable whether my family thinks so or not. It is unbearable for them. Do what needs to be done to end my life. But don't ask me, is it okay, Rabbi? Because I would say, in my estimation, every moment of life, no matter how difficult, is a life still worth living and still worth having that person being alive. And I always worry in that act about a slippery slope, that someone who is facing emotional issues or someone who has migraine headaches will say, I can't live with migraine headaches. And where does that slippery slope end? I don't want to be the person who has to make that judgment.
Thank you so much to Rabbi Lionel Moses. By the way, Rabbi Moses sat on the Committee of Jewish Law and Standards to the Conservative Movement, is an expert on Jewish halakha, well, there's Muslim halakha, which is comparable in Sharia, yeah, but they pronounce it with a Q sound, but is a true expert on Jewish law, and we want to give a round of applause and thank you for his knowledge and expertise. It is really a pleasure having you here and working with you and learning from you. And with that, Rabbi Ben Herman. So now soon we will have Cantor Ben and Rabbi Ben. Rabbi Ben Herman I first met at the same time when I was at Jewish Theological Seminary, and was one of the nicest people I had ever met, and truly a joy to talk to every time when I saw him at JTS, and I'm so happy to welcome him back into our lives and get to know him a little bit more. He will be talking about vidui at the end of life, some prayers, the last rites or the Jewish last rites, and also organ donation. Thank you so much for joining us, and let's give Rabbi Herman a round of applause as well.
Thank you, Cantor Ben. And as I told Steve Polansky, I needed Rabbi Moses to go first because his topic will lead into mine. I'm actually going to change the order in light of where the conversation went and do organ donation first. Hopefully you don't have an echo. I do have an echo again, Cody, but it's okay. I will handle it. That last question, Lydia, I just want to point out, according to Jewish law, that would be under a different halachic standard. Goses was often translated, at least when I was in school, as a moribund person, someone really at the point of death. A terminal illness, the word for it is treifa. Now, when I first encountered in the Talmud, it caught me by surprise because treifa, I'm like non-kosher meat. But no, that is the word for someone spelled the exact same way who has a terminal illness. And it is a separate halachic category from Talmudic times. As I did last week, I want to really begin with a story. I was going to hold up, and I don't know if you'll be able to see it. Actually, they don't have a sticker here, but my Florida driver's license has on it organ donor. And every single one of my licenses had organ donor on it, except for one. My first license when I was 16. I had studied with rabbis at the Milwaukee Kollel, and I'd asked them about organ donation, and one of them said, you can't commit to donate your organs because when the Messiah comes and we have Tekiyat HaMetim, resurrection of the dead, you're not going to have an intact body. So I talked to my rabbi at the time, Rabbi Lee Buckman, who was my greatest influence on going to rabbinical school. I sent him an email. I was looking for it, but old email account. This is back over 20 years ago. And what Rabbi Buckman said is complete nonsense. It's a mitzvah to save a life. When the day comes to resurrect the dead, God will sort everything out. And I'd add that this rabbi from the Kollel was talking about a category called nivul hamet, desecration of the dead. And the problem with that line of thinking is that it's, first of all, I consider it offensive to anyone who had an amputated body part, those born with birth defects. And generally, most authorities don't consider that as seriously. It's more of a Baba Maisa, that's where the opposition to donating organs comes from. There are, as Rabbi Moses was alluding to, a tug of war, however. And where does the tug of war come? Two different areas which are taken more seriously. One is, how does one know that their organs will be used to save a life? Pikuach nefesh, saving a life, comes first. Shabbat 121a says, even a one-day-old kid, you desecrate Shabbat to save his life, or her life, so that he or she will enjoy many Shabbatot to come. You desecrate one Shabbat for the enjoyment of many Shabbatot. We don't know, however, if the organs would be used for research. Of course, that may save lives in the future, but that's where it comes in. And I will be presenting from a piece of a conservative tshuva on this topic. That's where it comes in, that the cholah needs to be like omed lefanav, needs to be like standing before him. Literally, there needs to be someone in need of an organ. And of course, those of us who know that the list for organ donors far exceeds the list for organ recipients, far exceeds the list of organ donors. And there's another challenge, which is another Talmudic text I don't have time to go into today, but if you're interested, look at Yoma 85a. What is the source of death? Well, Yoma 85a, if a building collapses, I think of Surfside, which isn't too far from where I live. You're allowed to search on Shabbats because of Pikuach Nefesh. But where do you search up until before you give up? One rabbi says you search up until someone's nose. Why? Because breath is the source of life. Another rabbi says you search up to their heart. The heartbeat, the pulse, is the source of life. And it goes to a debate which the doctors can talk about better than I can. I have looked into it from a Jewish perspective. But is brain death considered death? Most authorities today say yes. Rabbi Moses mentioned one of them, Moshe Tendler, son-in-law of Moshe Feinstein, who also said yes. The chief rabbinate says yes. But there are those who consider only the heartbeat stopping, J. David Blythe and a number of others. So there's a debate even within the Orthodox movement on this. And why is it significant? Because for some organs, you need to harvest is the wrong word. And the tshuva I show will have a better word. You need to procure the organs at a time before the heart stops beating for some of the organs. So it becomes significant. Let's look at the conservative movement and what it has to say. And this tshuva is readily accessible. It's by Dr. Joseph Prauser. This is just the conclusion, section 12. That is all I'm showing. But if you go to My Jewish Learning and look up organ donation, you don't need to you don't need to be a member of the Rabbinical Assembly to get the actual responsa online. Anyone can access it there. From 1995, what it says is Pikuach Nefesh overrides all other considerations. I'm going to jump a paragraph. The preservation of human life is obligatory, not optional. There is a chiyuv, an obligation to donate organs, as we'll see. That not doing so can violate the Torah's prohibition of lo ta'amod al dam re'echa. Don't stand idly by the blood of one's neighbor, as well as preserving life. Okay. As I'm going down, I want to mention, well, I'll mention it right after this. A bereaved family member who grants consent for organ donation acts as an agent and partner of the deceased in the observance of the mitzvah of pikuach nefesh, saving a life. And as we have here, there's no greater kavod made honor to the deceased than to bring healing to the living. The hashoel shofech damim, one who delays is guilty of shedding blood. And there is a rabbinical assembly resolution on this topic from 2000 saying, and that conservative synagogues need to encourage organ donations among their members through an educational program and campaign, the goal of which is to have an increasing number of people sign organ donor cards and to inform family members of their desire to be organ donors. One point I want to mention before I go to viduing. This is important. We know there's a shortage of kidney donors, liver donors. What about that? My colleague, Rabbi Shmuley Yanklevitz, donated a kidney to someone he didn't know, a complete stranger. And I had a congregant back in Jericho who was in need of a kidney, since unfortunately passed away, not from the kidney, but from another issue. And I was debating, do I donate a kidney for him or not? The general consensus is, while it is a mitzvah, it's not a mitzvah in the sense that it's often misunderstood. It's a good deed, it's an act of chesed. That's what I'm looking for, to do so. It is not obligatory to do so. In other words, if there's a concern that you might need the second kidney later on for your family or what have you, you do not need to do so, but it's considered an act of chesed, a great act of loving kindness. With that being said, we're talking about here post-mortem, or depending on one's definition of death, immediately preceding death is what we're talking about here. And there's a lot more that one can go into on this topic. I'm going to give you one of the complications before I go on. One could say, if they believe that death ends with the heart stopping to beat, that to take the organs while one is brain dead, but their heart is still beating, they're guilty of murder. On the other hand, one could also say that not taking the organs while one is on one of the, as Rabbi Moses said, heart-lung machines, that they are guilty of postponing the inevitable. Literally, there's a category, halanat hamet. It's a mitzvah to accompany the dead to a funeral and not to delay it. And there are those who have made that argument as well, because they believe that brain death constitutes death, and that not accompanying, trying to add additional steps like putting someone on a ventilator or feeding tube or things which the medical professionals have said are just going to postpone in terms of time, that's actually a violation of delaying one's funeral. So you could argue it from both sides. It is not an easy issue in which to see. Now, we're going to go to the next topic, viduing. Confessional might feel to us Christian because it's one of the sacraments. People do it before priests. Canon Rosner had said last rites. Yet it is a primary Jewish tradition. As a matter of fact, in Tachanun, the prayer for supplication, the Sephardim say the vidui, what we say, ashamnu, bagadnu, every single day, they say tachanun. So the majority of the year, they say this. So there is nothing that is Christian about confessional. It is one of the 5 pillars of Rabbi Isaac Luria's Shuva. It is the Vav of the Taf, Shin, Vav, Vet, He of the word Teshuvah. Now, what is the vidui before death? I have, to this day, I've had a case like Rabbi Moses had. I've only had 1 or 2 where people call me and say, what do I do in terms of taking someone off light support? I've yet to have a case where I've gone to the hospital and had someone able to recite the vidui prayer, the deathbed vidui, on their own. I have recited it at the deathbed of countless people. And the goal is for someone to say it on their own, but of course we don't know the day on which we're going to die. And often when someone has reached that point, or they have contacted a rabbi, Marilyn, I'll get to that in a minute. It is already too late for the person to say the vidui. So I took this from the rabbi's manual, which hopefully I'm on the Derech Eretz committee now for the Ravnet, the rabbinical listserv. So hopefully they won't take copyright infringement, but I typed in the Hebrew. I'll just read the English. This is what someone is supposed to say. And this is the first line, if you recognize, of what we call the Ashamnu prayer, the vidui, in the singular. My God and God of my ancestors, accept my prayer. Do not turn away. Forgive me for all the times I've disappointed you. I'm aware of the wrongs I've committed. May my pain and suffering serve as atonement. Forgive my shortcomings, for against you I have sinned. May it be your will, Adonai, my God and God of my ancestors, that I live now with a clear conscience and in accordance with your will. Send a refuah shlema, a complete healing to me and to all who suffer. And one could ask along the lines of Rabbi Moses in the Talmudic examples, is a vain prayer, refuah shlema. But we know refuah shlema is not just refuah haguf, it's not just healing of the body, it's healing of the spirit as well. And this is a prayer I've said countless times. Modi manachnu lach. Adonai, our God, God of our ancestors, we acknowledge that all life is in your hands. May it be your will to send healing to the individual before me. Yet if the end is imminent, may it reflect your love and atone for all those times this individual could have done better. Grant him or her the reward of the righteous and give him or her eternal life in your presence. So the vidui is a way of passing on with to the next world with a clean slate, with being at peace, which is why it's ideal that the individual be the one to say it. And it's not that at the end of your life you think of all the wrongs you've done. Rather, it is, and this is not the only version of it, but this is in the rabbi's manual, it's more of a blanket statement. And it doesn't need to be these words. I've done spontaneous prayer as well, for someone to have a clear conscience before death. Now, a couple things here, and then I'm going to go to this question. I know I really as Steve said, I have an early flight, so I'm not really taking questions at this time, but I will via email again at ben.d as in David.herman@gmail.com. But I wanted to go to something very quickly that was in my video, but is not one of the topics, because I felt this is important to cover. And that is, it was triggered by a conversation I had with Ruth Elkins, who reminded me of a class she had with Rabbi Taff, which is, one of the topics was writing a letter to each of your children about what was special about him or her as a child, what you enjoyed or treasured about their personalities, highlights of when they were babies. And she said she's been working on this letter, and it got me thinking of two topics. And I can email this out later to the office. Ethical will is the first topic. Ethical will being a statement that one makes, just like a will. Wills are the topic next week, last will and testament. But what are the morals? What are the values that I want to be part of my legacy, that I want the next generation and generations to come to know about me and how I live my life? So in terms of ethical wills, I have a couple books here. One is by Rabbi Jack Reamer. That's the one I would definitely recommend. He's a rabbi's rabbi. And I also have a book, which is also recommended, Barry K. Baines, Ethical Wills, Putting Your Values on Paper. And then spiritual autobiography. This often is thought of as a Christian term, because they say the first one was Augustine's Confessions, but it's not a Christian term. I actually learned about this when I interned at Temple Bet Shalom in Roslyn. And it is, what is my spiritual practice, prayer practice, meditation practice? How has that evolved? How has it helped me through some of the trials and tribulations of life? And so for that, I have here, this is a book we use at Beth Shalom, Dan Wakefield, The Story of Your Life, Writing a Spiritual Autobiography. And I've not read this, a second one, but Richard Pierce's spiritual autobiography looked good as well. So we want to be thinking about our legacy and our spiritual connection while we're living as well. In addition to pre-planning our funeral and taking care of advanced directives and wills, which you'll talk about next week, we want to be thinking about our ethical and moral example. Okay. Someone else, a doctor's probably going to be better prepared to answer Marilyn's question, but I wanted to address one other thing I was planning to talk about connected to this. I believe the answer is no to this. Does organ donation delay a funeral? But I will let a doctor respond in the Q&A. What I wanted to address was something that does delay a funeral: autopsies. This was a major issue in Israel in the 1970s. They would not allow autopsies. And why was it a major issue? Because autopsy does three things. You have the nivur hamet, you have the disfigurement of the dead, you have halanat hamet, you have delay of the funeral, and you also have actually a principle, hana'ah min hamet. You're not allowed to benefit from someone who's dead, which sounds counterintuitive. You have modern days people who donate their bodies to science. That's definitely not a Jewish approach, but some people decide to do that. And all three of them are connected to autopsy. Now, this is where organ donation also becomes challenging. It becomes challenging because even if I do the organ donor card and I say only to save a life, it's in the rush of the moment, it probably will be taken and it may or may not save a life. It might be used for scientific research, but who's to say that research might not save lives in the future? It becomes a very tricky area. And so all I will say about autopsies, I'll let someone else say about the impact of organ donation, since I haven't been involved with the funeral that I know of with organ donation, but I have with autopsy. When someone died my age at 38, it took 2 weeks for the funeral. And that's 2 weeks less of, where someone's in Onain, they're bottled up. I didn't mention last week, but Rabbi Soloveitchik says, what is an Onain? I'm out of time and I can't get the quote, but he has quite a quote. It's actually in that Joseph Prauser tshuva about what an Onain is feeling. And he also writes in contrast, an organ donor actually feels good feelings in a sense, because they can feel at least their loved one, even if they died tragically and suddenly of a car accident or just all of a sudden, because the top candidates are those 15 to 65 in peak health. So generally not someone who's been terminally ill. The loved ones feel a sense of gratitude that the person is living on, parts of them are living on and giving renewed life to someone else. So I better stop there. There's a lot more that one can say, but you're welcome. I'm going to put in the chat where you can email me questions. But why don't I turn it back to Ken or Ben? Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Herman. It's really a pleasure to hear you speak two weeks in a row, and we are truly privileged that you are going to be our incoming rabbi. You'll be starting with us July 1st. I'm looking forward to that first Shabbat. You are truly one of the most up-and-coming rabbis of the conservative movement, and I'm getting the signal that I need to get closer to the mic. But once again, you are one of the most amazing rabbis in the conservative movement and the rabbinate today. We are truly privileged. The conservative movement is truly privileged to have your mind and your soul with us, to be able to give so much learning and spirit to our congregation. So once again, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to seeing you in person shortly at the gala, which is coming up. I encourage you all to buy tickets for the gala. This is our first in-person gala in a few years, and we'll be seeing Rabbi Herman then, and once again starting at his official start date on July 1st. With that, let's give a round of applause, a loud round of applause for Rabbi Herman. I would like now to introduce, last week we had Lynn Brothers present on funerals and interacting with one of the two mortuaries or funeral homes in Sacramento. We have two wonderful funeral homes. It's been a pleasure talking with you on the phone, Rebecca, and working with you, and look forward not only to working with you in the future, despite the circumstances, hopefully, as we say in Judaism, also in Simchas, hopefully we'll be able to be there for you not only at funerals, but in happy times as well. And Rebecca Mann is the general manager of Lombard Funeral Home, and she will be joined by Sarah Miwa, did I pronounce that right? Who is the pre-planning advisor. And last week we were talking about, in general, plan ahead for the mortuary, plan ahead for Home of Peace Cemetery. So the arrangements are not planned literally last minute or post last minute. And so it's wonderful that you brought Sarah here to join us as well. So with that, please come up and join us. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi. Thank you guys so much for having me here. Thank you for giving me a call and allowing me to come up and present to your community and to the group. My name is Rebecca Mann. I am the general manager of Lombard Funeral Home. I'm also a licensed funeral director and embalmer. I've been in the industry about 15 years. kind of all across the board, up from Merced, Lodi, all the way up. And I used to serve the diocese, but I made the move to SCI a couple years ago, and I found what I hope to be my home at Lombard Funeral Home. Lombard's is the last funeral home that I personally meet with families at anymore. The rest of my locations I simply manage, but I've grown very fond of Home of Peace and the community that's welcomed me, so I am personally serving Lombard. So I'm going to go into a little presentation I put together for everyone. Forgive me, I'm a little nervous. I'm usually behind the scenes. I don't usually step in front of the crowd, so I'll do my best here tonight. Okay, so a brief history. Lombard's Funeral Home has not always been owned by SCI. Lombard and Company was established in 1942, and SCI kind of acquired them in a roundabout way in 2014 during several different purchases. We have been serving the Jewish community since the mid-90s at this location. So we'll go ahead. And who is Lombard Funeral Home? So we are located in the Arden Arcade area of Sacramento. Myself, my licenses are up there. And I wanted to mention, being a licensed embalmer, we've been discussing donors and autopsies. So being a licensed embalmer, I am licensed to help deal with any case that needs any kind of body preparation done without having to transport that individual to another location. This allows us to occupy or operate within that small window of time that we have to service the families in this community. We understand that we need to have everything from start to finish in about 72 hours. We know that. So me having my licenses make sure that once that person's in my care, they never leave, and we can get it done as quickly as we need to. I also have an outstanding staff of Angelina and Angelique. I call them my angels. They really are. They really are. They can do anything that I can do. They can help facilitate anything that the community needs. I do have 2 other facilities besides Lombard's. They are not specifically Jewish, but I mention this because this allows me to tap into 2 extra locations worth of resources, extra staffing, extra hearses. So no matter what happens,
Thank you.
So no matter what happens, we'll always be prepared. We'll never be too busy, and we're always open 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. There's always going to be one of us, one of my personal team, that will pick up the phone, no matter what. And then, so we did recently get the building repainted, so I wanted to put some nice pictures of our fresh paint. Okay. Yeah. So what we can offer to your community in the time of passing, after end of life has come to fruition and you need to call me. We pride ourselves in being educated in the Jewish custom. I'm not Jewish, but I have great help in Lou at Home of Peace. He gave me guidance when I first took this position, and ever since then, you know, anywhere that we can find guidance, we go to the community, we go to our rabbis, the cantors for help all the time. Dr. Harvey Edber has been invaluable at helping us and teaching us, and he even came in and he made sure that our lift was working and we were prepared post-pandemic to receive people just as we were before. We are with you from the moment of the first call all the way into the end. Whether you've pre-planned with us or not, we're fully equipped to take the burden off the family, and we take that on ourselves all the way to the cemetery at the end. We get in touch with the rabbis and the cemetery first thing. The first call that I'm making, I'm already making notes to one of my angels to make the call before I'm even off the phone. So we know what the rabbi expects, we know what the cemetery expects, we know the date that we have to have everything done by, which is always the most important thing, is getting it done as quickly as possible. We are certified in the electronic death registry system for death certificates. This is one of the most important things that needs to be done before we can do a burial, and oftentimes can be one of the things that holds us up and takes a little bit longer. I've been in the death registry system for 14 years, and I know it inside and out, as my staff does. So we're on the phone with the doctors or the ME's office within the hour. You know, we can have death certificates done that day. And obviously, we are SCI, so we're a member of a large corporation. We have a little bit more to offer than the average mom and pop, simply because of the vast resources. We're able to be on call 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. Christmas, Easter, birthdays, holidays, we're there for you, no matter what. And most likely, you'll be dealing directly with me. Every single Jewish case that comes into Lombard Funeral Home, I am in some way a part of it. And that's what it means to be part of Lombard's as a dignity provider. You can visit our website. We're very transparent in our pricing. I brought price lists with us in case anybody had any questions. And Sarah's here today to talk a little bit about, we have two options as far as insurance and trusts to make sure that your future is taken care of for your families. And how we serve you. So we understand that there is the dressing. We understand from start to finish all the traditions that are included. So we also understand when we go to the cemetery, there are items that are required that aren't typically for other traditions, other cultures. We provide Kriya ribbons. We provide candles. We provide the soil of Israel, the shroud, the prayer shawls. And if we run out of, during COVID, we would run into a lot of instances where we had no suppliers left. So we had to find new suppliers. I know third-party casket distributors that will provide rabbinically blessed coffins or caskets, depending on what the family wants. And we can get them within the day. Within 24 hours, I can have a casket. So there's really no time limit that we've run into that we haven't been able to take care of. We can do these very fast. One of the other things I wanted to touch on, and I forgot to mention in my notes, is if you move out of the state, or if you move out of the county, or if you're somewhere else, not in Sacramento, we are very skilled at bringing you home. We're very skilled at laying you to rest in home of peace, no matter where you are. If you're in Florida, New York, Vegas, LA, we can, even out of the country, we've done it before, we can bring you home, and we can send you to wherever you need to be. If there's somebody who wants to go back to Israel, we can do that. We've done that before. And Sarah also has parts of her pre-need presentation are about covering you if you decide to travel and something happens to you, bringing you home to your family. So there are things that we can do to make sure that every aspect of this is taken care of. And you can kind of see some of the items that we do include. Most of those are free of charge, besides maybe the shroud, but that we get directly from the provider. So a lot of the things, if we do charge for them, it's only so we can pay our supplier. A lot of these items, that's not something that we make any revenue on. So aftercare. So we go into these types of services and we understand how quickly we have to go. You know, within 3 days, everything's done, we're good to go. However, it's very important to make sure the family is taken care of after. Apart from sitting Shiva and apart from your normal traditions, you might have things that you don't know what to do next. Everything happens so fast. How do you get past this? We have counselors on staff that can help you get through that. We have lawyers on staff that can offer estate planning guides, how to go through a will, how to look at an executor. We have all different kinds of hotlines and people that can help after the fact, what to do next. And if you're looking, maybe the arrangements didn't go quite the way you wanted them to. If you want to make sure they go exactly the way you do, you talk to Sarah and she puts that down in a contract and we follow that to a T when your time comes. We send out surveys and we ask you and we follow up. What can we do better? What did we do wrong? We're always learning. And if there are a lot of different families with a lot of different traditions. And we've done blended families with Jewish and Catholic or Jewish and Mexican. We've done everything that we can think of and we learn from it every single time. And if there's anything we can ever do better, we're always open to hear it. We're never going to shy away from criticism as long as it's constructive. No. And honestly, thank you. Thank you for having us out here. I'm sorry I'm a little bit nervous. Not a great public speaker, but thank you. Thank you. And if you have any questions, do we do questions or no?
We will be doing questions at the end of the presentation. And you did a wonderful job. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca and Sarah. It's a privilege to have you here. And I'd now like to introduce Dr. Mark Blum. Dr. Blum is a good friend of mine and a wonderful colleague. Dr. Blum had a very stellar career as an internist with Kaiser Permanente, and he retired from that job after 30 years, and then went on to become the medical director of Hospice, Bristol Hospice. And he's an excellent physician and is a wealth of knowledge, and we're very privileged to have him here. So Mark, why don't you come up here? And I think Mark will also be introducing the wonderful people that have come to volunteer from the Medical Society.
Well, thank you, Steve. And Steve, I want to thank you for allowing me to follow two rabbis. You owe me big time on that one. I do want to introduce some folks in the back of the room from the Sierra Sacramento Valley Medical Society. We have a task force called Honoring Wishes at the Medical Society, which has the goal of promoting information and use of advanced care directives. So we have Brandon Craig, Geraldine Marr, Clifford Marr, and they will be offering to you copies of the 5 Wishes Advanced Care Directive, and I'm told they'll also be leaving some in the office so that those of you who are on Zoom can pick one up the next time you're here. The Medical Society is graciously underwriting the cost of these directives, which are normally sold. So thank you to the Medical Society for that support. So I've been asked to speak about hospice and palliative medicine. We can have the next slide, please. Is there a way to get this box off so I can actually see my slides?
Absolutely. And that may be what
The-
Rebecca was
Yeah. So our objectives this evening are to understand the services of hospice and palliative medicine, for you to learn what you need to know about advanced care directives, and to become aware of important facts about organ donation. Next slide. And I do want to, at great risk, take exception to something that was said by Rabbi Moses in the medical realm. He did talk about side effect of morphine and slowing heart rate. That's actually incorrect, as I'm sure most of my physician colleagues here are well aware. Morphine does not slow or accelerate heart rate. It has the potential to slow respirations, although if it is carefully and appropriately titrated, that's not really a clinical issue. He also very accurately talked about how it's okay to use a medicine to relieve suffering, even if it has the consequence of speeding death. And what he's referring to there is a bioethical concept called the law of double effect. The law of double effect was something that was actually developed by a great Catholic scholar, Thomas Aquinas. And what the law of double effect says is that if you have an action that has a good intent, in this case, relief of suffering, and if a bad outcome should occur, such as accelerating death, as long as the intent is good, then that possible adverse outcome is justified by the law of double effect. So, just wanted to follow up on that. So let's talk a little bit about hospice. Hospice is actually a benefit, and it's a benefit that is prescribed by Medicare. Medicare funds hospice. They pay for the care, and therefore they get to write the rules since they pay for it. The referral criteria for hospice is, first of all, that the estimated prognosis is 6 months or less, and in quotes, it's if the disease follows its expected natural course. This is Medicare language. The expected natural course is not strictly defined. It's a physician judgment. It does not mean that everybody who is referred to hospice will in fact die within 6 months, because that is just not a precise number that we can predict. Especially the further the patient is from death, the harder it is to estimate the time remaining. The prognosis of 6 months or less needs to be confirmed by the attending or referring physician. There has to be available a personal care provider. While hospice provides many services to the patient and family of the terminally ill, there's a misconception that hospice will come in and do everything. That is not the case. As a hospice patient, you either need to have a family member or friend, or more often a group of family members or friends who will provide personal hands-on care during your stay in hospice, or you need to be in a facility such as a skilled nursing facility, assisted living facility, board and care, where there are people who are being paid to provide that personal hands-on care. The focus of hospice is palliative care or symptom management. What we say, care, not cure. So if you're a patient in hospice, what you're acknowledging is that the focus of your care is going to be on relief of symptoms, prevention of suffering, planning for death, but the focus will not be on treatments that are designed to intervene in the course of your terminal illness and try to change or alter that course. If that's where your wishes are, then you're probably not ready for hospice yet. There are no restrictions on the terminal illness for which one can be referred to hospice. So the diagnosis could be cancer, it could be Alzheimer's disease or another form of dementia. It can be heart failure, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease or emphysema. It can be kidney failure, and can be virtually any incurable terminal illness. Hospice is not just for cancer patients. Next slide. Services provided by hospice. Care can be provided to the hospice patient anywhere, which can include the patient's home, hospital, nursing home, assisted living facility, board and care, or a hospice inpatient facility. Although here in Sacramento, we really do not have any functioning hospice house or hospice inpatient facility as exists in many other communities. Hospice will provide an array of services. Nursing care is the foundation of hospice care. A hospice patient will have a primary nurse who will visit the patient wherever they are, whether it be in the home or some sort of facility, and they are the point person. They're making the periodic visits. Again, this is not to be confused. This is not around-the-clock nursing care. You still need somebody to provide the hands-on care. The nurse works under the supervision of a physician, usually under the supervision of one of the dedicated hospice physicians, or if the referring physician chooses to stay involved, then the nurse would be working under the supervision of the referring or attending physician. Hospice patients will have a social worker. Social worker has numerous functions, including providing counseling, providing referrals for other services, providing assistance to the family in doing funeral planning, and numerous other areas. Hospice provides a chaplain, and the chaplain services in hospice are non-denominational. While the chaplain usually has a faith tradition of their own, be it Christian, Jewish, Muslim, or whatever, in order to be a hospice chaplain, they are committed to providing chaplaincy services to people of any faith tradition or of no faith tradition. And the chaplains will always be more than happy to coordinate their activities with your rabbi or anybody else who you choose. A key element of hospice care is volunteer services. Hospices are required by Medicare to offer volunteer services, and the volunteers do various functions. While I said that you are required to have a primary caregiver, the volunteer can provide respite. So if you're the sole primary caregiver and you need to get out to shop, to go to a physician, to take a walk in the park, to clear your mind or whatever, a volunteer will often come in and sit with the patient for a few hours at a time to give some relief to that primary caregiver. They can also run errands for you. They also sometimes work in the hospice office to provide administrative services. Hospice will provide ancillary services as needed, not on a regular basis, but they can provide physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, dietitian, music therapy, occasionally art therapy. These are not restorative services. So, for instance, a common in hospice physical therapy is sometimes used. It's not to restore somebody to ambulatory services, as is fairly traditional for PT, but it would be to teach the family how to get somebody out of bed, transfer from a bed to a chair or to a commode or something like that. Hospice is also mandated by Medicare to provide bereavement services for up to a year after the patient's death. This may be in the form of personal visits or calls or bereavement support groups. We fully understand that the family's dealing with the patient's death does not end at the time of death. And so there is support available for up to a year. If the bereavement coordinator finds that one of the survivors is experiencing more than the normal grief, they can make referrals on to various grief counseling services. Let's talk a little bit about payment. As I indicated before, for all of those of us who are of Medicare age, which I think includes most, but probably not everybody here in this room, hospice is funded by Medicare. They pay the bill. For those who are not yet aged into Medicare, hospice services are usually paid for by private insurance. Unfortunately, even with the Affordable Care Act, there are still those folks out there who have no medical insurance. So many hospice providers will provide pro bono care to those who do not have medical care or private insurance. The payer covers all hospice-provided services. So all the people I talked about before, the nurse, the social worker, the therapist, the chaplain, all of those services are paid for by the hospice program. They provide pharmaceuticals. So all of the medicines that are prescribed for treatment of symptoms related to terminal illness are covered by hospice. They provide durable medical equipment. So if the hospice patient needs a hospital bed, a bedside commode, a walker, a wheelchair, whatever DME is necessary is provided by the hospice program. Except services not related to the terminal illness or part of the hospice plan of care are not covered. So it includes a limited number of pharmaceuticals. If someone is dying of heart failure and they're taking drops for glaucoma, for instance, that's clearly not related to the terminal illness. And so those drugs, and it's uncommon, but there are a few, that's going to be covered either by traditional Medicare or the private insurance or by the patient and family themselves, but that's not much. It also does not pay for services which are outside the plan of care. So to cite an example, a patient in hospice who has dementia falls, breaks their hip, goes to the hospital, and the family opts to have the hip pinned. That's outside the hospice plan of care, and therefore hospice will generally not cover that service. Then it goes back to traditional Medicare or the private insurance to pay for those services. Again, not too common that something falls outside the plan of care. Hospice does not provide food. Some people think that that hospice is going to, the doctor put me on a special diet. Will you pay for my food? And that is not the case. Food is considered the patient's responsibility. Hospice will not provide housing, so that if you can't be cared for in your own home and you need to go to a facility, a skilled nursing, assisted living, et cetera, that's up to the patient and family or private insurance or Medi-Cal, but hospice does not pay for housing. And as I said, it does not pay for personal care. You do need to have that primary care provider, or if there is not a primary care provider available, hospice will help the family to hire care, but again, will not pay for that part of it. Next. There are many local hospice programs. There are those that are hospital or health plan based. They're generally not for profit. Those include UC Davis, Kaiser, Dignity, Sutter, and Snowline, which is Marshall Hospital up in Placerville. Then there are private hospice programs, of which there are too numerous to count. They are generally for-profit, and there are many of them, and they provide probably a bulk of the hospice care in our community. All of the hospital and health plan affiliated programs, as noted above, generally don't have the capacity to provide care to all the patients in their programs, and so they often refer folks out to some of these other programs. Talk a little bit about length of stay. As I said, the referral criteria for hospice is an estimated prognosis of 6 months or less. In point of fact, the average length of stay in hospice is 90 days, but that's skewed because patients with dementia, Parkinson's, and other neurodegenerative diseases have an average length of stay of 105 days. Much more meaningful is the median length of stay, which is 18 days. For those of you who are not statisticians, the median means that half will be above and half will be below that number. So the median length of stay, half the patients in hospice will actually have a length of stay that is less than or equal to 18 days. And 28% of hospice patients have a length of stay that is 1 to 7 days, whereas only 14% of hospice patients have a length of stay greater than the Medicare standard of 180 days. Those of us in hospice feel that we really need 30 days to provide really good hospice care. If it's less than that, so much time is spent doing intake, getting patients oriented, getting their symptoms under control, that it's not the best care. 30 days is great. So let's turn to palliative care. Palliative care is, well, grew out of the hospice care movement. It's different. As opposed to hospice care, which is a Medicare-defined benefit, palliative care is a service, not funded by Medicare, and therefore not defined by Medicare. It's a service for those who have advanced disease. The disease is often, but not always, terminal. And that's a common misconception, that a patient who's being referred for palliative care is dying. They have a terminal illness. That is not, while it is often the case, it is not, clearly not always the case. And palliative care can be very helpful early in the course of a serious life-limiting disease. There was a wonderful study done at Massachusetts General Hospital about 10 years ago about patients with early diagnosis but advanced lung cancer. And what that study showed is they randomized patients to traditional care along with palliative care with early diagnosis. These lung cancer, these are patients who are still undergoing aggressive treatment. And what they found was, not surprisingly, that the quality of life for those receiving palliative care was better than the control group. But somewhat surprisingly, they found that those in palliative care actually lived longer than those matched patients in the control group, probably because their symptoms were better managed. In palliative care, like hospice, the focus is on quality of life, not so much quantity of life. And what is palliative care or palliation? The palliation is, like much in medicine, is from the Greek, and palliation is cloaking or relief of distressing symptoms. Unlike hospice care, palliative care can be concurrent with curative disease-directed therapy. So, turning to advanced care planning. The goal of advanced care planning is to understand the patient and family's understanding of their diagnosis and their prognosis. In an advanced care planning meeting, we would explain to the patient and family the expected course of the disease, talking about the benefits and burdens of potential therapies that might be employed in the treatment of that disease. In an advanced care planning meeting, we would identify a surrogate decision maker. And the goal of the decision maker is to follow the patient's expressed wishes. It is not to make independent judgments. It's not to say, when we talk to a surrogate decision maker, we don't ask the question, what do you want us to do for your father, mother, spouse, whatever? While that question is often asked incorrectly, what do you want us to do? The real question should be, if your father, mother, etc., could speak to us, what would he tell us about his or her goals of care? So therefore, the surrogate decision maker really comes into play only when that patient is no longer able to express what their wishes are. Then we turn to the surrogate and ask, what would they tell us if they could? Therefore, the role of the patient in appointing a surrogate decision maker is to inform them, not just to say, son, I want you to be my surrogate, but to say, I want you to be my surrogate, and this is what's important to me when I get to the stage when I can't speak for myself. To say something like, you know, every breath I have, every day I have on this planet is valuable to me. I would want my doctors to do everything possible within their technology to keep me alive, even if it means that I may be in pain or otherwise suffering. Or contrarily, the patient might say, you know, I've had a great life, but suffering is not my thing. When the doctors say, you know, there are not things that we can do to improve the quality of life, it's time to focus on symptom management. That's what I want. Or it may be somewhere in between. So for those of you, and I'm going to do a quick survey, who here has completed an advanced care directive? Spectacular. You are so far above the mean of audiences that I speak to. So you've done the first step, and that is you have completed an advanced care directive. But the second step is to talk to your surrogate, and not during the ball game. You know, at a serious time when you can sit down and really have a discussion and say to them, this is how I would want to be treated if I were in such and such a situation. And it needs to be updated, because what you feel today when you're in good health and able to come out here to KOH and listen to this may be different from what you would say some time from now when you have an advanced disease and your life is limited. So just because you've told them something today doesn't mean that it shouldn't be updated in the future as your circumstances change. There are numerous documents available for advanced care directives. 5 Wishes is the one that our representatives in the Medical Society here will be happy to provide for you. It's a good document. It's not terribly complicated, but it allows you to put in writing what your values are. Another document, which is not truly an advanced care directive, is called the PULSE. PULSE stands for Physician's Orders on Life-Sustaining Treatments. And this is actually a doctor's order where you say, you know, I want all care available no matter what. I want DNR, do not resuscitate, and palliative care, or I want something in between. And this is a legal document. If somebody calls 911 and your pulse says DNR, the first responders are obligated by law to observe that and not to attempt CPR. If any of you have occasion to complete a pulse, you want to make sure that it's readily available. This is not what goes in your file cabinet under important papers, which at the time you've had a cardiac arrest, everyone's in panic and says, where's Dad's pulse? Where's Dad's pulse? This goes taped to your refrigerator because first responders are trained to look on the refrigerator door to see if there's a pulse. Okay, following up on Rabbi's discussion of organ donation, UNOS, the United Network for Organ Sharing, is a program designed for continuous distribution of organs. We've already established that we have a shortage of transplantable organs. And UNOS has a nationwide allocation system which has a goal of getting the right organ to the right patient at the right time. It's not first come, first serve. It's getting it done right. Anybody can be a donor, irrespective of your diagnosis. Your medical condition at the time of death does determine which organs may or may not be acceptable. This is important. Donation occurs only after death. We do not harvest or remove organs from patients who are still alive, and that's critical. Now, in the state of California, we do recognize brain death, so that if somebody is declared brain death, and the criteria for the diagnosis of brain death are quite rigid. I won't go through the details because it's really medical minutia, but if one is declared brain death, then organ donation can occur prior to the removal of life support and cessation of heartbeat. The question arose, would organ donation delay a pending funeral? And the answer is no, because in order for organs to be viable, the harvesting has to occur within minutes of the cessation of heartbeat. So if someone's going to be an organ donor, at the time of death, they're whisked off to the operating room, the organs are harvested, and in very short order, the deceased patient is ready for transfer to the mortuary, and there's just no way that this will appreciably affect the time of funeral. Acceptable organs and tissues include heart, kidney, lung, pancreas, liver, intestine, cornea, tendons, bone, nerve, and heart valve. So almost anything. And if you have questions, I'm happy to answer it. If you have questions that you feel are too sensitive to address in an open forum like this, you have my email address up there, which I see didn't come through too well on this. It's marktpmg@yahoo.com, or there's my text number, and you can text me, and I'll be happy to respond to personal questions or to general questions from the in-person or Zoom audience. It's just me. I prefer to. Yeah. Am I live? Yeah. Anyway, I prefer to stand. Questions? Do we have anything from Zoom, Steve?
I'm going to look at that right now, but first of all, I'd like to again personally thank Mark for being here and driving up from down from the hill to participate. And I did forget to mention at the introduction, and you saw it on the slide, that Mark is ongoing clinical professor of medicine at UC Davis, and he does a lot of things related to that. But one of the things that I personally think is a wonderful thing that isn't being taught as well as it should be to our young potential doctors is Mark teaches physical exam, history and physical. You know, now frequently you go into the emergency room, you have a complaint, the first thing the doctor says, get an x-ray, get a CT, sometimes without even touching the patient. And of course this is a little bit compounded by telemedicine. Mark teaches wonderful courses in physical exam and history, and it really is a great resource in this community. Anyway, do we have questions from the audience?
Okay, we'll put you back up there.
The question is there an age limit on organ donation? The answer is no. Obviously, as one ages and the organs become less vital, some organs probably would not qualify, but things like corneas, I think, I don't even think there's an age limit on something like corneas. And while corneal transplants are not generally life-saving, they are vision saving. There are people who have corneal diseases that result in blindness that can be reversed by a corneal transplant. So it's not one of the sexy organ donations like a heart-lung transplant, but corneal transplants are a wonderful advance in medicine. Other questions?
Questions? The only question we had was, other question was the same question. Are old guy organs of any use? So another way to term the question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the answer is, as they say, the usefulness of organ donations will be determined by diagnosis as well as by age. We're probably not going to have a big market for 95-year-old hearts or lungs. But actually, most organ donations really are occurring in young people who have had severe trauma. There's a reason why we call motorcycles donor cycles. They do provide a good supply of young, healthy organs for transplantation. Yes?
So is the dot on my driver's license enough, or are there other ways of letting people know that I'm an organ donor?
The question is the dot on your driver's license sufficient information? The answer is legally yes, but I would always recommend that either your surrogate or your loved one, your family, are aware that you have designated yourself as an organ donor. Never hurts to have more than one source of information on that.
Well, thank you very much, Mark. We really, really appreciate this. And another hand for Dr. Blum here.
Thank you very much for staying awake.
And I would like to encourage everybody to come in person, if at all possible, next Monday, same time, for our final seminar, which is going to be quite extensive. And just to review what we're going to be discussing, David Long, who's a past president of Mosaic Law, will be talking about long-term care insurance. Carol Herman, who is a founder with her husband of the Foundation Aiding the Elderly, will be talking about care facilities and where to go for help, different levels of facilities, services available to the elderly, and the pitfalls of certain care situations. Then Mitch Oswald, also a former president of Mosaic Law, will be talking about wills and estates. Alan Brodowski will be talking, also a past president, will be talking about our Mosaic Law Foundation. Michael Ellison will be talking about the Jewish Community Foundation of the West. He is the relatively new executive director of that organization. Karen Rubin will be talking about the Mosaic Law Life and Legacy program. And that will be our closing program. And I again want to thank Cantor Rosner, who has been indispensable in putting this together, and Talia Berger, who has just been wonderful, and the KOH library and the legacy that our former members and current member have left for this shul is wonderful. I'd also like to thank Rabbi Herman, who has just been fantastic in contributing to this, even though his official time clock hasn't started yet. I'd like to thank Rebecca Mann and Sarah Miwa, did I say that correctly, from Lombard's with a wonderful presentation. I'd also like to mention our tech guy, Cody, and Dwight and Joanne Freund for all their help. And I think I've got everything. One more question. Yes.
I just,
Yeah. And of course, Dr. Mark Blum. Yes.
my question is, how do we see if these programs, if we weren't able to be here or to watch it on Zoom, how are they available for us?
We, Talia, do you want to answer that? So I think, yeah, I think ultimately within the next week, maybe after the third seminar is done, we'll go ahead and email the link to all the members of Mosaic Law, and we'll pass that on to the Federation too. And I think it would behoove them to also spread it among the Federation. And of course, anybody that else that wants the link, we'll make it totally available. So for those of you on Zoom, thank you very much. For those of you who are here in person, thank you very, very much. For the sake of our speakers, it's nice to have a live audience to talk to. And good night, and we'll see you next Monday.